All right, good afternoon and happy Earth Day. This is Dean Carpenter, Program Scientist for the Albemarle-Pamlico National Estuary Partnership, aka APNEP. Welcome to STAC members, as well as other management conference members and other participants who are joining for the inaugural presentation of the APNEP Science and Technology webinar series. Having presented on the importance of updating APNEP's regional ecosystem assessment at the STAC Summer 2023 meeting, I am very pleased the committee leadership elected to begin their webinar series on the topic via recent lessons learned from another estuary program who has recently gone through the experience. Just to note that the second webinar in the series is scheduled for May 7th at 3 p.m. Doug Newcomb of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will provide a primer on light detection and ranging, aka LIDAR, and benefits applying this technology in the Albemarle-Pamlico region. Note also that this presentation is being recorded for later access to those management conference members and others who could not attend. STAC co-chair Jug Kenworthy will now introduce today's speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. And first of all, like Dean said, happy Earth Day. I hope you do something that's worth it to the planet. I think our effort today is going to be learning a little bit more about one small corner of the planet, the Great Bay Estuary up in New England, along the coast of New Hampshire and Maine. And our speaker today, as Dean indicated, is the director of the Piscataqua Estuaries Partnership. And much like our NEP, we're a sibling program. And Kalle is recently been engaged in completing their most recent State of the Estuaries assessment. And we asked him to come and speak about that, given the fact that we're on the cusp of starting the process ourselves, something we haven't done in over a decade. So by way of introduction, Kalle got his degree in English at Colorado College. And somewhere along the way, while he was in Colorado, he had an epiphany and decided he wanted to work in marine science. In particular, he shares the same passion I have with an interest in seagrass. So he went to the University of New Hampshire and worked with one of my mentors, Dr. Fred Short, who's a world-renowned seagrass scientist. And he got his master's degree there in seagrass ecology, and then kind of thought more about his interest in journalism and working with people, and decided to get a PhD that was more focused on how to sort of communicate and take and apply science to put it to practical application. When he finished his PhD, he spent a little bit of time working in the SciSeed program at UNH, and then went on to work on the Science Collaborative, the joint program of UNH and the NOAA NEARS program. After that, he ended up working with NEP and now is the director. So I'll turn the virtual podium over to Kalle and thank him very much for offering his thoughts for today.
Thanks for that great introduction, Judd. Folks, thank you for lending me Judd so often. He and I have had a lot of great conversations over the years, and I've learned a tremendous amount from him. So thank you for that. Just as Hans takes off his video, I was just going to actually ask, I was going to thank Hans for having his video on and ask if others might consider turning theirs on. And the reason for that is that I made an explicit choice today to not actually share my screen, and I'm not going to show slides. I'm going to try to emulate as if we were sitting around a circular table together and try to emulate the human connection that comes from just being able to talk to each other. So I understand if you're not in a setting where you feel comfortable doing that. So obviously in that situation, just don't show your video. But if you're at all comfortable, I would appreciate it. And that way we, makes the conversation a little bit more, a little more human and a little less virtual. So good afternoon, everybody. It's a beautiful day up here in New England. I hope you're having a nice day as well. I want to start with some sort of a pop quiz, like we're all back in class again, and just to get the brain going and get the two-way interaction of this conversation going. So I'm going to start with some multiple choice questions for you, and you know, this grading is very serious. It's a big part of your final grade, so take this seriously. So the multiple choice question here is the goal, and I'm not talking about the objective, but the overall goal of an NEP is A, study an estuary of national significance, B, organize the managers around an estuary of national significance, C, protect and restore estuaries of national significance. Does anybody want to venture what they think the answer is? A, B, or C?
Is there a D?
There is no D. We're just going to go with A, B, C. I know D is always popular, right? A little bit of all of them. Nope, it's A, B, or C.
That's what I was going to say, all above. But
Yeah, me too.
Well, that you've just gotten to the heart of the question. This is the heart of my talk, was that optional answer that you all just provided. So again, if you're thinking about, right, it's like means to an end. I would say the first two are means. The A and the B were means, and the C is the end. The C is the end, is the place we want to arrive at. We want to arrive at having estuaries that are protected and restored. How you get there, by studying it, by organizing the managers, those are the most common ways, but those are means, those are not ends. So, and what that means is that you don't, depending on what your community, the role your NEP plays, is going to affect which mean you lean on. Like in some cases, you're going to really lean on the science. There are some NEPs, and Bill's probably aware of this, like the Santa Monica NEP, I think, does a tremendous amount of communication and restoration and not so much of the monitoring, because they have other people in their community who do that. All right, here's my second little, this is a true or false rather than a multiple choice. If you go to the EPA website, the National Estuary Program website, and you search, you know, it's like 2 or 3 pages of content. If you search for the word science, if you do a word search, you will find the word science. True or false?
You're stumping even the EPA folks.
The answer is false. The answer is false.
No.
You will not find the word science. If you go and you search for the word monitor, will you find the word monitor? The answer is no. If you search for the word research, will you find it? The answer is no. Will you find the words protect and restore? Yes. So once again, how you go about protecting and restoring is not a fait accompli. It's a choice. And the reason I say this, oh, I think I have one more question just to get us going. Yes, I do. There's a paper I'll talk about a couple times today by Cash et al. 2003. And those of you who want a citation for it, I can, Judd can nag me about that later, and I can send it to him and he can distribute it. But essentially, Cash et al. Says science is necessary, but not sufficient for sustainability. And he says what you require for science to be applied to sustainability is high quality engagement. And he breaks down what is required for high quality engagement. And I guess my question to you at the beginning of my talk is, for your whole community, I'm not talking about the NEP, I'm talking about the whole community. If we just reduce this to a simple question of a pie chart, in an ideal world, how much of the resources in your community would be on science, and how much of them would be on engagement in order to protect and restore the estuaries you care about? So would it be 50-50? Would it be 90% science, 10% engagement? So I'm going to give you about 20 seconds. And then maybe we can even put our answers in the chat. So your first number should represent the percentage for science. And and then you can do a slash. And your next number should represent engagement. So if you think it's 60% science and 40% engagement, you should put 60/40 in the chat. And I would say, go ahead and do that when you're ready. And maybe,
I'm trying to find a chat.
It's down on the lower right.
well,
Lower right.
well,
way
Hans, why
down
don't you
there.
start us, Hans,
Oh,
why
I
don't you,
see it. I see it.
You see
Okay.
it? Hans, why don't you start us off verbally though? What would be your fraction there?
The first one is science. The second one is engagement.
Correct.
30/70.
That's very interesting. And Dean, what are some of the other responses we're seeing? I can't see the chat right now.
I've gotten one from Judd who says a 70-30. Kelly, may I ask, is that for an NEP and abstract or our particular NEP? Because like you said, some have to emphasize because of their partner and their strong suits and weak suits, etc.
Well, actually, the question wasn't for an NEP, it's for a community.
Okay,
Your community is made up of your NEP, your Sea Grant, your NEARS,
right.
all these different people, your state. And so my question is for your community in North Carolina.
Okay.
And now Hans, did you say 30/70 or 70/30?
I think I think science is slightly less than community engagement.
Okay.
So I might go to 40/60.
Okay. Well, you and Judd are going to have to duke that out after the call. 'Cause you guys are a little
yeah.
bit different that way.
Well, yeah. Well, he's done more work than I have in these places.
Um,
I have a
So
couple
Dean-
more if you like.
yeah, go ahead and read them off for me, Dean.
Sure.
Thank you.
Angela Padalelli says 50-50. Tim Ellis says 50-50. 50-50 from Kelly Summers.
Great. These are great answers. So, with that, I will give you the sort of the outline of my talk. And by the way, at any given time, please raise your hand and interrupt me for clarification. And Dean, maybe you could help me see raised hands because this interface is a bit new to me.
Sure.
But my point of my talk is that I asked myself the same question I just asked you. And because my PhD was on why science gets used or gets ignored, I had a certain bias going in. And my bias is that we biochemical scientists tend to overemphasize the importance of our work in the overall realm. Again, what I came into this thinking is that science is absolutely critical, but it is insufficient on its own. And so I kind of had more of a Hans parallel approach to this, where I was thinking, gosh, we should be 30-40% science and the rest communication. We really need to do a better job of engaging our community. But when I looked at our budget, we were more like 80% science, 20% engagement when I looked at the NEP budget. And so I've been chatting with staff since I became director 2 years ago, and we agreed as a staff that we really need to change that. We need to slowly start to transform and streamline the science and invest more in engagement. And so the State of the Estuaries report, but even more than the report, the conference, we do our conferences every 5 years and our reports as well every 5 years, was really our statement to our entire community that we're changing our focus. And I will tell you that most people felt it was the best thing they'd ever attended. We had like sort of rewritten the book on how to do a conference like this. It was paradigm, breaking and paradigm shifting. And then there were a few people that were like, if you had told me this is what we were going to do, I wouldn't have come. And those people tended to be the technical folks at the state. They said, this is not what I was expecting. And it was a lot of, non-scientific stuff. There was 240 people in the room. And I would say maybe around 20 people felt like, I wouldn't have come if I knew. The rest people said it was sort of like, wow, this completely changes the way I would approach a conference like this. I've never seen anything like it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. And Judd asked me to, address what we did and whether we thought it was worth it. And that's what I'll try to address as I continue here. But let me pause and just see if anybody has any questions so far. Questions or comments so far? And Dean, just let me know if you're seeing anything. Okay, I'll just continue. Feel free to interrupt. The reason we made our choice was when we look around at our community, there is no very clear communicator. It's the opposite of one-stop shopping around here, right? There's like 20 different websites. Who looks at oysters? Who looks at seagrass? Who's looking at water birds? It's not all, it's very, very hard to find. And what's the clear message? And what should managers do? And what should citizens do? It's all over the place. So we're dealing with a very complicated subject matter, and now we've made it even complicated sort of logistically to know what to do, doubling the uncertainty that people have around how to handle the fact that our resource is declining. Seagrasses, oysters, clams, salt marshes, it's all declining. So before I continue, we need, as some of you may have joined late, this is a low-tech presentation. And as such, I'm going to get up and get a map now. This is a map of, I think everything might be backwards, but at least you can kind of see that we're up here in New England, and that's the Atlantic Ocean here. And here is the Piscataqua River coming down to the Great Bay. This is a very large system, which was really impacted by all these sub-watersheds here. And then we also have the Hampton Seabrook Estuary down here, sits right on the water, and there are issues around storm surge and sea level rise and things like that. But this is really the one that Judd has been engaging with me on so much. It's a much bigger estuary, much more affected by the land. So I sort of told you before that my PhD opened my eyes. I'm not saying I have the answer, but it changed my perspective, my personal perspective, on if we're trying to actually protect and restore. Those are decisions. You have to unpack what makes people protect and restore. You would unpack that, and there would be tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of decisions in there. So the science of how humans decide seems very relevant to me, logically. And I hope you would agree with that. And yet, I feel like most of the time when we talk science, we're not talking about decision science, we're talking about ecological science. And ecological science is completely important, but I would imagine that decision science is also relevant if, again, our goal is to protect and restore. There's a really great book on this called How We Decide by Jonah Lehrer, Lehrer. Tells a story in that book about a man who loses essentially what many people say is the emotional region of our brain, which is the lower part between the reptile brain and the human brain on top. There's the emotional brain, both on the left and the right. And in a car accident, this man had the emotional part of his brain, critically injured. And he submitted himself for study, and everybody said, we are about to find the best decision maker of all time because he won't be clouded by emotion. And what they found was he was the worst decision maker of all time. He couldn't choose between a black pen and a blue pen. And so people were really startled by this. And if you read a lot of the brain science that's been coming out lately, and there's been so much of it because of the fMRI studies, what we've learned is that we really cannot just make decisions without our emotions. And as a scientist who's, I was raised like many of you to believe, well, you've got to separate emotions, right? You got to take emotions out of this. We got to be completely. And it turns out that that's actually might run counter to our goal of protecting and restoring. So my goal as the person who was trying to run this conference was to figure out a way to present science. How is our estuary doing, right? Trends. What are the trends in seagrass and trends in this and this? But to also make sure there were emotional contact points. during the day so that people could be urged to make decisions that would help protect and restore. So both the report and the conference were implemented in that way. And I will say, especially the conference. People were sent homework 3 months before the conference and were nagged a little relentlessly by me and my staff to complete the homework. And the homework used an approach called appreciative inquiry, which you can look up, which basically says, we're going to ask you to discover, dream, and design. Discover is about thinking about a case study that inspires you that something good can be done to address a certain problem. Then you dream of what is it that you want to accomplish? Well, for me, I want to get back to 2,900 acres of seagrass, right? We're down to something like 1,200 right now. That's my dream. And then you design in order to achieve your dream. And then the conference itself went sort of like science. Then we would have either poetry or music, if you can believe it. I thought, after this day, I'm going to be told that you're fired. You're a director of an NEP and you have us listening to poetry. Like, you're out of here, man. I hope you enjoyed your 1.5 years as a director because you're done. But in fact, people came up to me afterwards and said that was kind of cool. And then we would, after either the poetry or the music, we would have structured collaboration. So we wanted people to be working, not just listening, because if you're listening all day, you're going to go to sleep. So try and get people actually working, coming up with ideas, building social capital, and then we repeat the cycle. And that was the day. We even had an improv group come in, and they were inhabiting characters, a professor, a state manager, and a citizen. And then they would stop the improv and the audience could ask the characters, what do you really think about that person? What are you not saying right now? And that turned out to be a complete mind blower of an activity. And that's something I can talk about later if people are interested. So I think the day was a success, and I'll talk a little bit more about the feedback we got, because Judd did ask me that. But I want to take a second to do another interaction with you all. In coming back, and this kind of builds on, I think it was Dean's question or maybe Hans's question, coming back to that Cash et al. Paper of 2003. I asked you what the ideal would be, and you guys gave your answers in the chat, right? I think Judd said 70% science, 30% engagement. Hans was more like 40% science, 60% engagement. That's ideal. Now, my follow-up question to you, and again, if you want to share this in your in the chat, what's the reality? In your community, and that again, it's not your NEP, your community, including Sea Grant and all these other folks, what is the reality? 50-50, 60% science, 40% engagement? And Dean, if you see any answers coming in, feel free to let me know.
Will do.
I'm still stuck on the 70-30, just feeling maybe it's a bias I have just because I'm a science, but I feel like we don't do enough engagement. We do a little bit more than.
Well, and that's really the question is, are we doing enough engagement? And I would say in my area, we're not, and it's not organized well.
We have
Yes.
Hans with the 60-40 and again, Judd with 70-30 on the desired.
So, I mean, the simple question is there a discrepancy? That's the question I'm asking you as a group. Is there a discrepancy between how much engagement and science is supposed to be happening? Is it too little? In some respects, it's a zero-sum game because you take money from engagement when you do more research. and you take money from research when you do more engagement. So it's a question that requires a tremendous amount of thought.
So lining that up with, writing a state of the estuaries report, which often seems a lot more technical and science oriented. Are you thinking that it needs to be a better balance?
The way we're approaching it, Judd, is that the report is there. We're trying to write it in a more engaging way. But we know that if all we do is write this report, well, that's super important. And we've been told by people, right? Like, if you guys don't write this report, our community is really missing out on some important stuff. It becomes the basis of a lot of the discussions between the regulators and the nonprofits. And so it's super, super important. But if we don't do more than just generate that report, my sense is that we're really sort of neglecting our duties here to protect and restore. So what we're trying to do is to use the report as a conversation piece. I'm going out as much as I can, Judd, and having conversations in the community about the report. I'm going to schools, I'm going to retirement homes, I'm going to the municipalities themselves and presenting in the municipalities. I'm going to nonprofits. I'm trying to figure out how to do this efficiently without killing myself and my staff. And how can I partner better with other people who can do this well? Any other thoughts or questions before I have two more points that I'd like to make that follow along with what Judd asked me to talk about. Then I was going to do a summary, and then
Kalle,
yeah.
I got my hand up, but that's okay. I'll take it down. I think it makes a lot of difference in terms of the individuals that are working at NEP sites, or for that matter, in estuaries. I think some of us, we do science, but we also have a lot of engagement. And here, the NEP is one example, or the Albemarle Pamlico Sound committees that we're on. Others are, pretty much doing an important science aspect that's needed to answer a critical question. So I think it depends on the roles that the individuals play within each program. You probably have a lot of engagement, because you're an engaging guy. Others are interested in these systems because a specific question needs to be answered, and they provide the answer for us as a group. So, I think that the numbers, the 60-40, 40-60, can vary quite a bit.
That's a really great comment. I think in some respects, it reflects a conversation that I'm having in my brain, which is, so as you know, Hans, we got some money from bipartisan infrastructure law. Some folks have invested that into projects, and some folks have invested in staff. And so this conversation we're having today, if you were going to invest in staff, would help you decide what kind of staff to hire because of what you just noted, because they are going to play a huge role, right? So are you going to hire another scientist? Are you going to hire a communications person? I've actually hired a data scientist and two more engagement people. Other comments and questions before I continue to make a couple more points?
Yeah, this is John. I just wanted to make a comment. It seems to me the split also depends on, with a particular topic or problem, where you are on the spectrum from emerging to well-studied. And as you move along that spectrum, you put yourself in a place where you can engage more productively compared to a problem that is emerging where you're heavy on science early on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with that. I will also note that we've been struggling. Judd has been helping with this question around seagrass and how we can, and I will say in that situation, John, and I don't know if you have one like this, but it's that classic situation where the more you study it, the more questions you have.
Oh yeah.
And the harder it's getting for people to interpret it, you know. And that's because it's a moving target. We say we've been studying the Great Bay Estuary for 40 years, but it's not the same estuary.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
it's
I agree with you.
It's changing every day.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I look at APNEP from the atmospheric side, and I look at the range of issues that we're facing, and you have PFAS on one end of the spectrum where there are so many unknowns that it's difficult to engage with the community in a way that is not scary, that is informative, that is productive, and then we have other problems that are more well known, where I think we can engage more productively. But you're exactly right. The more you study it, the more questions come up. I was just thinking from our perspective, is there one number? Is there one split? And I think it's topic dependent.
I think it is, and I just think it's important to have the conversation. And I see your hand, Judd, so we'll go to you in a second, and I'll just say, you know, the classic land grant formula, and this was based on agricultural research stations and being able to have an extension person who would go and then talk to a farmer. Back in the early part of the 20th century, it was always every dollar of research had to be matched by a dollar of extension. It was 50-50. And that's the model that Sea Grant was built on, but I don't know that they necessarily follow that. I would say it's not really a dollar for a dollar, at least based on the I could be wrong. Those of you who are really familiar with Sea Grant in your area could call me out on being wrong on that one. Let's go to Judd and then to Dean.
What's come to mind in this discussion is that you know, the way we're structured here at APNEP is very different than you are structured in your NEP, which is the same in a lot. They're all different. We have a big stack of Science and Technical Advisory Committee with a heavy science orientation. And even with that and all the expertise we have, you know, we really struggle to pull that science all together in a way that can relate to the public and the community. And, you know, it's almost like you get mired in all this information. And I guess my question is how do you find that sweet spot where you know, you kind of trigger this, you take the science and you trigger the response from the community that combines to be an effective lobby to the folks who need to make decisions and provide money and do this and that. I mean, that to me is the biggest challenge of writing a State of the Estuaries report, is, you know, finding that happy medium, but the outcome moves everybody along. You don't get mired in the science. You don't overwhelm the public and the community with too much information, and you hit the nail on the head, and it moves the whole process along to get to that, you know, restore component. So
yeah, I'm and not only you know, you focused on the report itself, Jed, but I think it's the whole process. So like I'm actually trying to study our rollout process and ask myself, well, how would I do this if this was an ecology study? How do I subsample my community to find out if I'm having an increased impact? So I've actually chosen a few parts of our watershed, and I've chosen places that are very different, like some that are, you know, right near the ocean or on the estuary, and some that are at the headwaters who don't even know what seagrass is, right? And don't care, right?
we have that situation here. I mean,
Yeah.
we have watersheds that drill way deep into the Piedmont and into other states that.
Yeah, they don't want me to come up there and talk about seagrass. They want me to talk about cyanobacteria in their lakes or milfoil or other invasives that are clogging up their lakes and streams. So what I'm going to try to do is just to pick a few of these places and then do follow up and say, well, has anything changed as a result of these rollout activities? And that it's really ambitious, and I don't know if we're going to be successful because it's very hard to evaluate this kind of impact. Some people would say don't even try because it's going to be so hard. But people want you to because it's federal tax dollars. But anyway, I see your hand is up, Dean.
Yes, and I was sort of amazed because it was very much in line with Judd's comment. Because Kalle, I was thinking when you were offering those for us to vote on those various proportions of science and engagement, and I was trying to clarify well, you were emphasizing the community, right? And I think there's a tendency for at least some of us in this audience to think about the NEP. And in fact, you said your proportion of when you were hiring, you're talking about who you're hiring at your staff, right?
Right.
So I agree. My thing is, I think like certainly in our triangle area here in North Carolina, there's a lot of great science being produced. But is it the science at the scale and reach and comprehensiveness that is to address the questions we're trying to answer at our partnership? You know, and I think as far as staff's concerned, I lean more science than I guess you were hinting at, just for the notion of getting these what I call science integrators, basically. Like Judd said, there's a lot of things there, but thinking about how to pull together, how to translate that heavy science to answer the questions we want answered and communicate it to the public. So I just thought I'd provide that perspective.
No, I appreciate that, and it reflects what we're struggling with here too. And I just think it's what our solution to this has always been to grab people who are going to end up making the decisions, right? Planners at big municipalities, or I don't know how it works in your area, if it's more of a county situation versus municipality, or there are certain nonprofits that are super important to engage with. But when you talk to them, find out what the limiting ingredient is, right?
Right.
And you can find out, oh, sometimes the limited ingredient is scientific knowledge, but a lot of times it's not. It's like, well, what you're asking for answers to questions we've known the answers to for decades, and we should have just had this conversation before, right? And so, oh, okay, well, what are the implications of these answers you've had for decades? And so it's some cases the limiting ingredient isn't the science questions that we're grappling with, sort of on the point of the spear, on the point of the scientific spear. It's more like they're behind us. Do you know what I mean? And so you got to kind of in this is talking about my community. I got to go back and spend and say, do you know where we were in 2015 in terms of our scientific understanding, and make sure that we're staying together as a group. But in other places, it could be very well. No, the reason we are not making progress right now is because of the lack of scientific understanding. And I will tell you that is definitely not the case where I am. The reason we're not making progress in protecting the watershed is because municipalities are underfunded and overworked. It has nothing to do with us not understanding how ecology works. If some rich person wanted to give me $1 billion, I would say you just need to hire tons of staff at the municipal level, because that's the bottleneck. And big developer comes in and says, I want to build 30 homes, and there's like one volunteer person who can barely keep his eyes open at 9 p.m. and he's going to get completely overwhelmed by 6 paid consultants who are paid by the developer. So it's not, in some cases it's not science, but in some cases it is, and I think it's up to us to ask that question. Does that make sense, Dean?
Yeah, and that brings up another question is, should a state of the estuaries report be focused on advancing the science, or pulling like reaching back and pulling the community up to where the science is right now and what we can do with it? I mean, it almost seems like somehow that it's like a dance or a synchronization. that
Agreed.
has to be done.
Agreed. And in some cases, you can do both, right? I mean, this project that you've been helping us out with, Judd, we have these conversations. We're doing stuff that Judd said yet recently on a meeting. I've never seen this done by anybody before. But at the same time, in order to have that conversation about these crazy new hydrodynamic model results we're getting, you have to remind people of the things that we've known for years. Like, why does residence time matter? I mean, there's most of the people who are at the table from the municipalities don't know what residence time is and don't know why they should care. So here we are talking about stuff that nobody's ever done before. This guy's building residence times on a per meadow basis, not per bay, per meadow. And he's able to say, well, where was that water exactly? 2 days beforehand? Was it from, some really amazing stuff. But in order to have that conversation, you have to bring everybody up to speed on why do we even care about residence time. So I think it's not either or, Judd. I think you can do both.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good example of where the science could quickly get ahead of the community, and then of course you don't get the benefit out of that in the overall goal.
Exactly. So my last couple of points before I end here, and we can have more discussion. Well, Judd asked me, why is it worth doing a State of the Estuary conference the way you did it? And I kind of had to reframe my answer a little bit is, well, it's worth addressing the issue. The issue of how people make decisions is worth addressing because of the science. The science is showing that biophysical science on its own is not sufficient. So it's worth it because our natural resources are worth it. Now, the question is, did my approach make a big difference? Did it move the needle? And I don't have the answer to that yet. And I will say there were mistakes that we made as people raved about the conference, but there were clear mistakes that we made that I would do differently next time. And so I don't know if this is going to make a difference. What I'm seeing is that if I don't try something different and new, I'm head of this organization that is essentially just doing a really good job of documenting ecological degradation. Like, that's my new title, Director of Degradation Documentation. And I don't want that to be my title. I want to be, Director of Protection and Restoration. And I feel like if I don't do something different, it's just going to keep going down. And so I'm getting desperate. And I don't know if it's going to work, but I feel like I've got to try something. And so it's worth it it's worth it for the same reason that the biophysical science is worth it, because we care about these resources. So in summary, and then maybe we could have a little discussion, and then Judd and Dean, if you wouldn't mind saving me just a few minutes for a final closeout segment, that would be great. But my summary here is, again, our job is to protect and restore. Only study if that's how you protect and restore. To protect and restore, we need to be scientifically curious, not only about ecology, but about how humans decide. The science clearly shows that decisions require emotions. The science is clear on that. As clear on the fact that too much nitrogen will cause eutrophication. And so each NEP has to think about their own community and say, okay, what roles is everybody playing? And are we addressing that question about, do we have sufficient engagement or not? And if not, I do think that it's the role of the NEP to have that conversation at the community level. I think the NEP is better suited to do that than any other organization I can think of. Better than the NEARS, better than Sea Grant. If you look at the mandating documentation behind the NEPs, you look at the Clean Water Act 1987 amendment, and it's all about coordination of managers. And so, you know, ask not for whom the bell tolls, essentially. If the proportion of engagement in science isn't correct, that's on us. And so my question to you, just to start off a little discussion segment here, is what sorts of comments and questions arise for you as you hear this case study of how we are approaching things up here?
Well, for me, it makes me think back to these conferences that we've had. Well, I forget what we've been calling them, Bill and Dean. Periodically, we've had these, big conferences. They were almost like State of the Estuary conferences, but I think there was a lot of information going in one direction, whereas, the concept that you seem to be following, or the idea you seem to be following, is that conference that's might be linked to preparing an ecosystem assessment or state of the estuaries, whatever you want to call it, has to be a two-way street. That involves the feedback through engagement. And I don't
I think
don't know
I think that's
what else
clear.
to say about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I think that's also a good pedagogical approach too. People are going to learn better when they're involved. So my wife's an educator, so I get some of that stuff in our late night chats. So that's probably affected my thinking, but I think that is an important takeaway, Judd. Are there any other thoughts or questions or comments?
I guess I have a comment, Kalle, about I was thinking, your emphasis on the protect and restore side, right? We our CCMP, our last generation CCMP, we're currently updating as we speak. It's going to come out this year, hopefully. Is heavy on what we called, at least back in the previous cycle, as ecosystem-based management. And a major facet of that is adaptive management, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to restore and protect, I would suggest you need the science to sort of guide you on where you're going to do that restore and protect. And also the importance of monitoring and assessment on the back end to say indeed that you're understanding the system. That's what sort of would hopefully guide you on where you're going to do that allocate those resources to mitigation. Are they making a difference? Like you said, like for you, I guess some aren't showing up now yet, the difference, making the difference. But I think that's essential. I think that's one of the things attracted that we've had feedback from our like our citizens advisory stakeholders, the notion of accountability, which they found refreshing, coming from the government, who often does mitigation actions. They establish it and it just runs for decades and just assume it's doing what's intended. So we're a big advocate of that notion of social learning as another learning by doing, or whatever, is having the humility to know that we don't really understand the system, especially at the scales we're dealing with, but we take the best science we have, institute these restoration, protection, engagement actions, and I include engagement because you're impacting human actions, and see how the system goes. And then if what happens a year or two, maybe in 5 years down the line, isn't going the way as expected, you'll change you're working with the decision makers, change the way to do business, and be a little bit more reactive, and keep nudging towards that ultimate goal.
I totally agree with that. We actually have an adaptive management approach up here as well. And the thing I'm wrestling with now, especially when the BIL money goes away in 2027, is how much of a science program do I need in order to continue to do the bare minimum adaptive management work, so that people can say, okay, we tried this, what are we seeing?
Right.
I don't think we're going to have the money to fund the cause and effects There's no way I can do that and do everything else. But we can say, well, are we seeing what we did? And then maybe we can look for a grant to chase down the cause and effect studies that need to happen sometimes. Are there other thoughts or questions?
Well, if I may, I'll just follow up with that. If, you know, you were saying, um, you don't know how you're going to do that thing, but I think it's important to communicate that message to your general stakeholder. I mean, the broader community, and explain why you need the resources, because they can be your advocate on you know, they can help you get the resources to provide the answers in the next cycle.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think that's really what the BIL funding is going to, it has and it will continue to foster really good conversations. Given what we're all doing up here, the different people are working on how should we use our extra $909,000 per year for 5 years. And those questions, as you all know, those questions came and went really fast, and you had to come up with those budgets really fast. And now we're all thinking, okay, what when it goes away and we go back to being normal again after this superhero status, and we go back to having just $850,000 a year, and then you have to have the conversations. Okay, what's left? You know, who's going to do what in this reduced capacity? Thanks, Hans.
See you.
I got a few
Well,
more minutes. I'm gonna hang in there till the bitter end. Till I.
Oh, okay. Great, great. Any other thoughts or questions?
We got about 8 minutes to go on our timeline if you want to.
Well, I'll just tell you, you know, I had a different sort of close planned, but it's starting to feel a little, I don't know, out of place. But I'll just tell you the close that I was going to do, and then instead I'll just close with my favorite story, just because it's a fun story. My close was going to be like, I'm a Cousteau kid. You know, I grew up watching that show on Sundays, The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. And I don't know if you remember this one, those of you who are my age or older, but there was one where he was following this salmon, the salmon's journey up a river to try to spawn. The whole episode, he'd been following this salmon. And then the salmon gets like dislodged or something, and essentially gets off its path and is dying on TV. And Jacques Cousteau is just narrating the whole thing with his beautiful French accent, right? And now we watch as the poor salmon dies and breathes its last breath. And I'm sitting there as like an 8-year-old going, dude, just throw her back in. Like pick the fish up and throw it in the deeper water. And I think that the story I was going to tell was like, you know, again, I don't want to be the narrator, the detached narrator who's just saying, yeah, the seagrass is going away. I want to do something about it. But I don't want to become an advocate, because that's not our job. And I think there are ways to do this without becoming perceived as an advocate. But I think you can do that scientifically. But the other story that I'll just tell, because I think it's a great one for challenging assumptions, was back when I was working for the Near Science Collaborative and studying some of the projects that we funded. There was one in Deal Island. Are you all familiar with Deal Island? Isn't that near you somewhat? I thought it was in North Carolina, but maybe it's Maryland. So, you know, and this is a place that is really suffering. It has a great historical and cultural interest in oysters and other things, and there's really suffering due to sea level rise. And we went out there, and the head of the project was actually an anthropologist. And he said, no, if we're going to do a workshop, we have to do it on a Saturday. Can't do it on a weekday, because then people won't be able to come. And we're going to do it on a Saturday. This is an example of engagement. We're going to do it on a Saturday, and at the end of the day, everybody who's still there and signs out gets a $100 bill. And we did this. Like we checked with the feds, and they're like, yeah, you can do that. Okay. So we sat there at the end of the day with and handed out $100 bills to everybody. And there was one gentleman there, you know, who was like related to, I mean, his family went back centuries, right? And he had so much passion and experiential knowledge. He was the key to that whole meeting. And he gets his $100 bill and he looks at me and he says, "This is the only reason I'm here today." And I looked at him and I felt so sad. And I said, "Oh man," I think his name was Rich. I said, "Rich, you were so passionate. I just felt like you were so into everything we were discussing." And he said, "I am. This is my life. Everything we discussed today is my life, but I have other things to do on a Saturday." And so it just makes you realize how hard engagement is. Even as much as he loved his island and the subject, he wasn't going to come unless somebody gave him $100 on a Saturday. And he's the type of person who, you know, he's a total community leader. So the extents to which we sometimes have to go to engage people and not just the folks who are the usual suspects is pretty amazing.
Good point.
I really appreciate the chance to chat with you and Judd and Dean. Happy to talk more afterwards if there's like other thoughts or questions people have. I really appreciate you taking the time and showing the interest in what we're trying to do up here. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that with us, this perspective.
All right.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Have a good one.
All right.
All right.
Talk to you soon, Judd.
Yep. Thank you.